Being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. On tonight's show, the government has a good idea. Rather than having to go to the GP to get a repeat prescription, you can go to the pharmacist. I like the sound of it, but will it in real terms actually work? We'll discuss the decline of the fox since fox hunting was banned. That's an interesting one. Roy Chubby Brown, the comedian, banned by a big theatre chain. What does this mean for the future of British comedy? And she's from Phoenix, Arizona. She was a well-known TV presenter. She was a liberal. She's now a conservative, and she could even be Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate in their election next year. We'll find out in Talking Pints who Kari Lake really is. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thanks very much indeed. The evening news for you. The Information Commissioner's Office says it won't be taking any action against Lancashire Police over the disclosure of Nicola Bulley's personal information. The force came under criticism after the 45-year-old's body was discovered in the River Wyre in February following a 3-week search. Meanwhile, the police watchdog, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, also says it's identified 2 areas of learning after the force had contact with Nicola Bulley in the days before she went missing. An independent review by the College of Policing into the handling of the case is also underway. Its findings will be published in the autumn. Now, the Met Police Commissioner has defended his force's policing of the coronation after some criticism for the arrest of 6 protesters ahead of the event. Sir Mark Rowley described the arrests as unfortunate, but stressed he supports the arresting officer's actions. The force confirmed the individuals face no further action after being stopped under the new Public Order Act. And the Prime Minister has today said he supports people's right to protest, but says the new laws are needed to protect against serious disruption. Pharmacists will be able to give prescription medicine without a GP sign-off in the latest government plans to ease pressure on doctors. Under the measures, patients will be able to get treatments for 7 common conditions, including a sore throat and ear infections, without seeing a doctor. It's hoped the new guidelines, which will come into place this winter, will free up about 15 million appointments at surgeries over the next 2 years. Rishi Sunak says the measures will also help cut waiting times for those seeking medical help. International news, and the former Prime Minister of Pakistan has been arrested by anti-corruption police in Islamabad. His supporters are being told to shut the country down. Footage shows paramilitary troops in riot gear surrounding the former cricketer inside what looks like a courtroom. The move has led to protests in Mr. Khan's hometown of Lahore, and members of his political party are now calling for support. Imran Khan was ousted from power in a parliamentary vote in April last year. Here at home, a marine barge, which will be used to house migrants, has arrived in UK waters. It's called the Bibby Stockholm, and it docked in Falmouth this morning, getting ready to be refurbished ahead of its use as a housing centre. The 3-storey barge will be used for at least 18 months and can hold up to 500 people as they wait for their asylum claims to be processed. It's part of a government scheme to move asylum seekers away from costly hotel accommodation. And ambulance workers in the southeast of England have been striking today as their union escalated its industrial action over pay. Unite's members employed at South Central and South East Coast Ambulance Service continued their strike until 10 o'clock tonight. Last month, the members rejected the government's offer of a lump sum cash payment and a 5% pay rise. Members of other health unions accepted the same offer. And lastly, thunderstorms have swept across parts of the UK today, causing disruption for road users and travellers. The Met Office earlier issued a yellow weather warning, which is in place until 10 o'clock tonight. It covers much of southern England, East Anglia and parts of the Midlands. The Met Office added there could be some damage to property caused by flash flooding. We'll keep our eye on that weather story for you. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
As we travel around the country doing Farage at Large, one of the commonest complaints we get from the audiences is they cannot get to see their GP. They may want to get a diagnosis, they may want something simple like a repeat prescription, and it's driving people mad. And maybe that did impact a bit on the Conservatives in the local elections last Thursday. Well, as part of the government's primary healthcare plan, they've come up overnight with what I think is a really good idea. Rather than having to go to your GP for a relatively common complaint, perhaps a sore throat, earache, something like that. And if you need a repeat prescription, why not bypass the GP and go straight to the pharmacist? Gosh, I think it's a good idea. I think they've actually got something right, and it could free up millions of GP appointments every single year. Question is, can the pharmacies cope? Do they have the means to do all of this physically? And given, I was surprised by this, that 670 pharmacies have closed around the country since 2015, and there are some real arguments going on with government about funding. Can the pharmacies actually do this? If it worked, it would be a terrific, practical, sensible solution. Certainly in America, you would go to a pharmacist with a common ailment. So, it's the government's big plan. I like the idea of it. Will it work? Let me know your thoughts. Farage@gbnews.uk. Well, somebody who can probably answer that question is Dr. Layla Hanbeck, Chief Executive of the Association of Independent Pharmacies. Layla, we know there's a major crisis with our GPs. We have a rapidly rising population, our ratio of GPs per person is getting worse every single year. This idea, on the face of it, looks quite clever.
Yes, definitely. It's a step in the right direction, Nigel. And this is something that we have been asking for. And, we've been saying for years that we're willing to support the NHS in every way that we can. The problem has always been that those calls have not been listened to. So it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Maybe they're listening now, you know.
Maybe they're listening now. But there is a big elephant in the room, and that is that our funding since 2015 was cut, and then it stayed at the same place since 4 years ago, despite the inflation, despite everything else.
So let's just get this straight.
Yeah.
You get funding from central government for helping the NHS.
Of course. So 90% of all the activities that we do in a pharmacy are absolutely NHS related. So our funding essentially comes from the NHS. But that funding pot has for many years been pretty empty. So there is a deficit of £1.1 billion, a shortfall of £1.1 billion because of
the government are promising another 645 million for this scheme, which is sort of halfway towards what you would like to see. But presumably, this plan means a lot more work for pharmacists as well.
Yes, and that is something that we need to dive into and look at in terms of like what the specifications are. So at the moment, we're obviously struggling with workforce challenges, and depends in terms of like how much this is going to land on pharmacies who are currently under a lot of pressure.
Now, you do also, as a pharmacy, sell other products.
Yeah.
So the shop can make a profit. Would this help that, hinder that, make no difference?
Well, again, that OTC bit for an independent pharmacist is a very, very small portion of what they do. So 90% of what they do are NHS services, from dispensing
90%?
90%, and sometimes over 90%. I mean, in rural places, in places where deprivation is, you have more than 90% of your activities NHS funded.
Because some of the big chains, I suppose, are more like supermarkets with a pharmacy attached.
Yeah, so that you've got the nationals, like Boots and supermarkets that have other activities. But independent pharmacies, essentially, all their activities, a vast majority part of their activities is NHS related.
And how many of them are there? Independent?
Well, at the moment, the number is shrinking pretty fast. So since 2015, we've seen about 800 pharmacists shutting their doors for good. And this year, we've anticipated if the core funding, that pot I was talking about, where there's shortage of £1.1 billion, is not supported with an injection of liquidity, then we'll see more pharmacists closing the doors. In effect, about 600 to 700 closing by the end of this year, if nothing happens.
Right, so this plan comes in at a time when the independents are closing down anyway.
Yes. So we want the government to make sure that the support the government... And the supporters, the problem that we have, we don't know the details yet in terms of like what is expected of us as part of this service that we're asking to do.
How much? I mean, this is the big announcement of the day. And, Rish's mother, of course, was a pharmacist, and he's gone back to Southampton, where he grew up. And, all of that makes a very good story. How much consultation has there been with your group ahead of this announcement?
Well, there hasn't been a lot of consultation about this particular thing, but we have been saying to the government that, we want to do more, but fund us appropriately and pay us essentially what we deserve for the work that we do. A lot of pharmacists, Nigel, are working out of pocket. So the drug bill is going up, the medicine costs are going up, and a lot of them are dispensing medicines at a loss. No one should do that, but they do that because, again, we cannot add our costs onto the patients and the consumers. So whilst other businesses can do that, we don't do that. And so they take it on themselves.
In short, Leyla Hambeck, will this plan work?
Well, it depends on the government if they're willing to make it work, and on the officials that work with us. So we are entering negotiations with them to see how this is going to pan out. We have always been willing. We kept our doors open throughout the pandemic, and we never shut our doors. And we've always been there. We've always been there for the public. And so it depends on them if they want to make it work.
You did great work during the pandemic. Unlike many GP surgeries who all they would offer was Zoom consultations. I don't expect you to comment on that, but I want this to work.
No comment.
No, I want this to work. It makes so much sense. Thank you for joining me here at GB News. Let's hope that it can work. Keen to get your thoughts, keen to get your views. In a moment, is it possible that banning fox hunting has now led to foxes becoming endangered in parts of rural Britain? We'll look at that in just a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So will the plan to let pharmacists do a lot more diagnosis and give repeat prescriptions, will it actually work? Some of your views coming in. Steve says, are pharmacists doctors? No. If a pharmacy prescribes antibiotics for a sore throat, which weeks later might actually be diagnosed as cancer, who is responsible and who gets sued? Steve, with respect, the point is that we want people with really serious conditions to go to their GP so that they can get scans rather than having to wait weeks for an appointment because people with minor ailments are in their way. And if you went to a GP with a sore throat, you would not immediately be sent off for a scan. It's only if that condition gets worse. John says, nothing original here, Nigel. Pharmacists in France and many other countries have been on the front line for years. John, you're absolutely right. France, America, wherever you go, pharmacists have a really important role in people's lives. All we're doing here at last, I hope, is playing catch-up. Time for one more. Jason says, we're once again letting the NHS off the hook. They still cry out for more money regardless. The NHS is not underfunded, it's just poorly managed. Well, Jason, if ever you wanted to see an example of centralised, socialist-style organisation, management and expenditure of money, then the NHS is where you would go. However, I thought our witness, Layla, a moment ago, made the point that small, independent pharmacists, 90% of their work is NHS work. And if they're closing in their hundreds because they can't make ends meet, then it seems to me something, if this plan's going to work, needs to be done. Now, last night we had Professor Matthew Goodwin on the programme, and both he and I have been speculating that the next set of net migration figures will be at an all-time high. Well, a leak published in today's Daily Telegraph suggesting that in a couple of weeks' time, when the net migration figures come out, there will be 675,000 people. That is double the highest ever year before Brexit. And just think about this. Net migration ran from 1945 to the year 2000 at about an average of 30,000 a year. And we're now talking about pushing up towards 750,000. Oh, and that's without those crossing the channel in boats. Is it any wonder we can't get GP appointments? Is it any wonder that our kids can't get onto the housing ladder, yet nobody in Westminster even wants to talk about it? Maybe that's because those that make our laws generally have little understanding of the real world. I was vociferously opposed to the fox hunting ban that came in 2004. It seemed to me it had nothing to do with animal rights or the welfare of foxes, just a deep dislike from an urban majority against a significant, quite significant, majority living in the countryside who wanted to pursue fox hunting, part of their way of life, as it had been for centuries. Well, blow me down. As a few years go by, we're now told that by 103 vets who published a paper to say that in rural England, the fox in some areas is in danger of completely dying out. Why is that? Well, if we're not hunting them with hounds, we're shooting them at night with lamps, with long-range rifles, and we're actually taking out a lot of the fitter foxes. It seems extraordinary that you ban fox hunting and the numbers decline. By the way, none of this applies to urban foxes, which are increasing. And the hypocrisy of the whole thing. I mean, the RSPB, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, they shoot foxes because if foxes are there, where there are ground nesting birds, they will do vast damage. And yet, because they recognise a long-range rifle shot at night is unlikely to get a clean kill, guess what they do? They send dogs in to finish them off. The whole thing is absolutely crackers. Alex Proud is a club and restaurant owner, a Telegraph columnist who has opined on this subject before. Alex, can you believe that we banned fox hunting and we now have a shortage of rural foxes?
Well, obviously, the absurdity of that is wonderful and a perfect illustration of what happens when stupid legislation, as you rightly said, the tyranny of the tiny majority over the very large minority and geographically very separate lifestyles. That's what happens when this sort of stupid legislation occurs. As you rightly said, legislation that was nothing to do with preventing cruelty to animals. I mean, let's face it, if you want to prevent cruelty to animals, let's talk about how we kill our cows and look after pigs and how we breed chickens and various other farmed animals and worry about that far more than we do foxes in the countryside. And it was an absurd piece of legislation that's to do with some very ancient sense of class war that toffs hunt and that posh people get on horses and they beat the poor people from their horse, which is obviously absurd because actually hunting in the countryside is actually an extraordinarily cross-class pursuit. It's nothing to do with posh people or poor people. It tends to do with country people.
No, Alex, I go to the Boxing Day hunt meet, West Kent and the old Surrey and Burstow. I go every year. I've been going for decades. And it's far from a group of posh people. It's an incredible cross-section of people who are there. Although, of course, they're not allowed to hunt with dogs. They hunt a trail. But, Alex, you know, I was on the march. There were over 400,000 of us that marched through London to say, let us get on with what we want to do. By the way, I've never hunted a fox myself, but I absolutely support the right of others to do so. But I wonder, as a restaurateur, whether what we're really seeing here is a total change of our thinking about animals. I mean, I bet you have vegetarian and vegan dishes now on your menus.
Yes, I do, and again, I live and let live. One of my eldest son is a rampant vegetarian vegan. He changes from time to time. I have nothing against it, and it's an extremely healthy lifestyle choice. I tend to feel that the concept of live and let live is fairly important. I'm far more interested in legislation about healthy farming of animals, not using steroids to make animals grow at huge rates. The steroids in animals come through to us, and that's why we have the problems we have now with becoming with antibiotics, etc. So I'm much more concerned about that I am, and the humane killing of animals for farm is much more important than this ridiculously tiny subject. And hunting still goes on. Obviously, it's drag hunting now, and I'm glad that the hunts have survived and the hounds have survived, and also a part of the countryside and our history has survived. I just don't really like it when a tiny majority rules a very large minority. I might get in trouble with you there, Nigel, because we could mention Brexit, but I wouldn't do that on your show.
You'd be welcome. Alex, you want to come in and argue about Brexit with me? You're welcome any day of the week. But your point that these urbanites who call themselves liberals are actually the most illiberal people that have ever lived in our country. Alex, thank you very much indeed for joining me on this very interesting and perhaps to some surprising debate. Roy Chubby Brown has been a comedian. Yes, of course, he uses bad language. Yes, of course, he is outrageous. And yet he sells videos, DVDs, discs. He packs theatres all over the country. He has done for decades. And now a major theatre chain has banned him for not being in line with their principles. Comedian Jim Davidson will join me to discuss that in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Britain's...
His name is Royston Vasey, but he's known as Roy Chubby Brown. For 35 years, he's been going around this country making people laugh in very considerable numbers. But now, the Ambassador Theatre Group, big theatre group in Britain, Europe, indeed in the States as well, have cancelled Roy Chubby Brown. According to Brown's team, it's because apparently he doesn't fit their equity, diversity and inclusivity policy. Well, if that's the case, is the future of any comedian secure? Well, who better to join me than Jim Davidson? Jim, what is going on? I mean, Roy Chubby Brown, he's rude, he's loud, but you know what? If I want to pay my 35 quid to go and see him, isn't that up to me?
Well, I think it is, Nigel, and I think it is. People should vote with their feet, but here's the thing. If you look at Roy Chubby Brown, he's different to me. We're both as outrageous and probably like telling rude jokes. But he's not political, is he? He's not that, you don't know who he votes for. Obviously, looking at him like that, he's obviously a raving loony. But you don't quite know. So it's not a political thing. I just think that the Ambassador Theatre Group, who I've known for years, I've worked for Ambassador Theatre Group for 40 years and now found myself cancelled as well. I'm not sure why they cancel. I think it is because I think maybe that certain firms, certainly the Ambassador Theatre Group, are struggling for money and profit. And so they're looking all around the world for finance, and they don't want these people to say, oh, you've got that awful man. So they sort of clear the decks. They want to be nice and lovely and woke. And that's why Chubby's got himself cancelled, I think.
I see. So you've got financial problems, so you cancel the very comedians that pack it to the rafters, yeah?
Yep, I got a better one with that, and I'll tell you specifically. I was booked to play the Key Theatre in Peterborough and some theatre in Barnstaple. They're owned by the same group. And it was sold out. And a month before I went there to do the gigs, I was banned from going the next time. So they wanted me to go this time because I'd sold both theatres out, but they don't want me back because it doesn't fit in. And again, these are people that are looking for finance. It's from the Arts Council, from this. ATG are a fantastic group. And to be fair, Nigel, if I didn't like someone, I owned a theatre and I didn't like them, I wouldn't let them in as well. But, is it designed, is that decided by theatrical people or maybe some secretary or some finance person? That's a
but
bit
it's all
close.
one way, Jim, isn't it? How many left-wing comedians are getting banned from these theatres?
Well, no, because they're all lefty lovies anyway. Yeah. But where we go. But the great thing is, people will find Chubby Brown. People will find me. And
well, Jim, actually, and you've suffered your share of cancellations, but you've got your own channel now, Ustream.com, and I'm told you're doing very well.
Yes, and we've just signed up Chubby Brown as well, just to rub their noses in. And being banned from a lot of theatres makes people will find you. I've just done a tour, Nigel, and I played to 94% business. Chubby Brown will do the same. This is people power. You know all about this, Nigel. Yep. You're a champion. Yep. And so is GB News. Let the people decide.
On that note, Jim Davidson, I say thank you for coming on, and I'll see you very, very soon, I hope. Thank you. Well, there you are. Jim's right. If theatres don't want the business and people want to hear Roy Chubby Brown, they will find ways to do it. Now, last night we talked about the Trick Awards, yes, the Television and Radio Annual Awards, and the fact that my name was there on the list of runners and riders as News Presenter of the Year. So many of you were trying to vote for me that the system crashed, and it's caused some real anger out there. I've got messages like this. Hello, Mr. Farage. I've attached a copy of my trick voting form supporting you in the news presenter category. As you can see, it was rejected with no explanation. Maybe this is how they rig the voting. In spite of this apparent skullduggery, I wish you well. By the way, I'm sad to miss you on Bournemouth this week. Regards, Peter. So many people getting in touch to say they couldn't vote. So we have been on to Trick, and they assure us that the technology has been updated. They were surprised by the reaction, and they promise us it's now working fine. So those of you that couldn't vote and tried time and time again, they've got their ducks in a row. So please go and, well, if you want to, please go and vote for me. If after this we find people can't vote, well, maybe then. Maybe then I'll be tempted to join those who think they're trying to rig the election against me. Now, in a moment, I'll be joined by somebody who was shot to political stardom in America. She could even be Trump's VP running partner in the election next year. Her name is Kari Lake. And yet what's interesting is she was a well-known TV presenter for many, many years and thought to be an Obama supporter and a liberal. What we'll do in a moment on Talking Pints, we'll find out who Kari Lake really is.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, loose women legend Carol McGiffin breaks her silence after reports her views on COVID were behind her axing, spelling the end of 2 decades on the infamous panel show. Has woke ITV made a nasty habit of censoring its biggest stars, or is there more to the story? Carol speaks out exclusively on Dan Wootton tonight, 9 to 11 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope? It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm joined by rising Republican star Kari Lake. Kari, cheers and welcome to Talking Pints. I tell you what, you wouldn't be allowed to do this on American television.
I don't think so,
No, I doubt it.
They should. This is a great idea. This is a great idea.
Well, people sit down, whether it's a cup of tea or a coffee or a drink, and they talk about life, and that's what we try to do. What a weekend to be in London.
How amazing. What an amazing point in history to be able to witness. Hasn't happened in my life, hasn't happened in your life, probably most people's lives. And I was so impressed with the beautiful display the pomp and circumstance, and
Plenty of that.
a little bit of pinching myself, like, am I really watching this happen?
It was incredible. And, to see Charles and Camilla, our king and queen, leaving the Abbey. I was with an historian who said this could have been in the 1200s. It was a sort of medieval feel to it all. Yeah, look, America didn't like George III, and we didn't like George III much either, but hey, what a time to be here. Kari, it's interesting. You're a very well-known figure in the States, known here to those that follow politics closely. But I just wanted to find out a bit more about you. And it appears, you're a Midwest girl from a very big family and genuinely quite poor.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, we didn't think of ourselves as poor back then. My father was a history and government teacher and a football coach. My mom was a nurse. When you have 9 mouths to feed, it almost doesn't matter what you do, you're going to run out of money because that's a lot of mouths to feed. But it was wonderful to grow up in a big family, 8 girls, 1 boy. And we didn't have food in the house. And you're probably thinking of the biofilm that I put out.
Yeah.
But as a child, I never thought, wow, we're poor. Isn't that funny? We probably could have been on government assistance if my dad would have wanted us to, but, we would have had to have been really destitute before he would ever put his hand out and ask the government to help out. Times have changed quite a bit. The government kind of hands out money a lot easier nowadays.
Yeah, well, you've actually got in America towards a sort of European-style social model.
It's being pushed, yeah. But the great thing from growing up in a family like that is the work ethic you learn. You have to chip in, you have to help out, and the riches that I got from that, besides my siblings, is that work ethic, that Midwestern work ethic, because I'm from the heartland of America, Iowa, which is a big agriculture state. And so I'm just blessed to have that upbringing. Wouldn't change it.
And used to very cold winters.
Cold winters.
Winters that we couldn't even believe here.
I don't know. It was pretty cold here a few days ago.
Well, not quite like Iowa in January, February. So how is it, Kari, from this background, when's the light bulb moment that you decide television's where you're going to go?
I didn't really decide that I was going to go into television. I was a broadcast journalist for 30 years, and I didn't even decide to do that until halfway through college. And I thought, that would be an interesting job, to be able to tell people's stories, to be able to be in the middle of news when it's happening. And I absolutely...
For those watching on television...
Oh, there I am.
You can see Kari in action, sorry.
I absolutely loved my career for almost all of that time. And then during COVID, I realized...
Something happened, didn't it? Because, you were very settled. You'd been, one of the star presenters for 22 years, the best in Arizona, much warmer, where you moved to, and you were there. But it's interesting, because it's difficult, isn't it, sometimes to know what the TV presenters really, really think. We're having that debate about
Well,
Fox
you're not
News
really supposed to say. If you're just a journalist, you kind of keep your political opinions to yourself. At least you're not to put them out, unless you're a commentator. Like everyone in Britain knows where your political leanings are, so they're not surprised. But when you're doing straight up news, you're supposed to keep it quiet. But during COVID, I found that an agenda was being pushed, and I did not want to take part in not putting out the full truth. I didn't feel we were...
No, clearly something happened here. And this is what I want to explore and examine, because, we know that you were a Republican when you were very young, disenchanted by the Iraq War, in fact, by constant wars, and I totally understand that. And yet, but you're seen sort of within the last decade as being quite a liberal figure. There's you, your husband Jeff, you donate money to the Obama campaign. You're allegedly quoted as talking about, maybe the way to deal with the border crisis is to have, amnesties for people who come illegally into America.
Actually, that's not true, but I'll go into that.
But true or not, what I'm saying is this. The perception of you was that you were a fully paid up member of the liberal elite there in Phoenix, Arizona. And something happens. COVID comes along. And it seems to me two very big things.
Two different things happened. Yeah. COVID was the wake-up call I needed to step away from my career, to walk away from a 7-figure contract and say, I don't care how much they pay me, I will not read this anymore. I will not take part in propaganda. So that happened to me before I even got into politics or dreamed of it. But I grew up about an hour away from...
Did you feel that, Kari, over COVID policy or more broadly about politics as a whole?
Yeah, politics, it got really old. I mean, you're working in a newsroom in America, and it's 95% liberal.
Yeah.
And they were hell-bent on trying to bring down President Trump. And I saw President Trump as the greatest president I'd ever seen since Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan is what caused me at 18 to register and be a Republican. And then somewhere along the way, the Republican Party lost their way as they were starting wars, endless war, another war here, lying about Iraq.
And you thought Obama...
That's why we backed away and said, who's going to...
But you thought Obama could be a sort of bright new hope for America.
I did think that, and I think a lot of people did. 10 million Obama voters switched over and brought us President Trump.
Yeah.
They said, wait a minute, this guy's not what he said he was going to be. Not only did he not bring us together and put some of the racial unrest to bed, he helped stir it up.
But you were sceptical about Trump to begin with, yeah?
No, never. When he came down the escalator, and I've got a book coming out here, and I write about this, I remember people in the newsroom losing their minds over his speech at the bottom of the escalator.
And the funny thing is, prior to that, he'd been an enormously popular figure in America. The Apprentice.
Beloved.
The Apprentice mega. And this was the guy that took on the big guys, took on the mafia in New York, real estate, glamorous wives. I mean, he was a very popular figure.
Living the American dream, right?
Yeah.
And people loved him. And then, oh my gosh, he decides as an outsider to jump into politics. Much like me, I decided as an outsider, I'm going to jump into politics. Why not? Isn't that how it's supposed to be? And that's when they turn on you. Because you're an outsider.
Well, what you did, of course, was, you went along and spoke at a CPAC event, and which I've been going to year after year. So suddenly, you decide, and there you are, you're married, 2 children, you got a good job. In fact, you've done it for so long.
A great job.
It's probably relatively easy because you've been doing it for so many years.
Yep.
You know what you're doing. 7-figure income, popular, liked, invited to all the smart parties and all the great places, and you decided to give it all up.
Well, it wasn't really a party. I didn't go to all the smart parties because I was...
You know what I mean.
It was a wonderful life. It afforded me a lifestyle that was wonderful. But I got to live with myself and look at myself in the mirror. And I got to answer to God. And I really was starting to feel that. Once I felt my job was not just becoming biased, it was becoming immoral. And once you realize something you're doing is immoral and you continue to do it, then it makes you immoral. And I'm not willing to do that. So I stepped away.
Okay. And the evangelical side of you, that also developed during COVID, or was it there before?
I was raised Lutheran and Catholic. My parents were from opposite sides of town. And that was actually, when my mom and dad got married, my mother's father disowned her for several years because she married a Lutheran outside of the Catholic Church. Obviously, she was Catholic. We have 9 kids. So I was always raised with faith, strong faith, and we went to Sunday school every week. But during COVID, when I really felt a need to get back in church, all the churches were shut down for some time. And my church was shut down by appointment only. And I said, we really need to get back in church. I'm just really feeling a draw. That's when we discovered an amazing evangelical church, and it changed our lives. It changed our families' lives.
You talk about God quite a lot.
I think it's really important right now. I think that God is so missing in our society, in our culture. And I'm not going to say it about your culture. I'm not sure if God's missing from your culture. But in America...
The coronation was a profoundly Christian event.
It was beautiful. It really was.
Charles is, he's the head of our established church. Now, we are an increasingly irreligious country, but actually at the centre of our constitutional arrangements, Christianity is there. And it really... I
think people are returning to their faith right now in record numbers.
Do you think so?
I think so. I mean, I know a lot of people who are getting back into the church and reading the Bible because we're in such difficult times. And oftentimes, when things are going great, we tend to go, okay, hey, thanks, God. That was great. Thanks. But when things are going tough, that's when you're down on your knees praying.
So you've been through this sort of epiphany. You religiously, faith-wise, politically, and you start appearing, as I say, at things like CPAC. And then I think it was Turning Point, a Charlie Kirk event with Turning Point. And suddenly, Donald Trump spots you and immediately recognises a star. So did that relationship with the two of you just sort of hit it off immediately?
Well, interestingly, I'd interviewed him. I had been granted 2 exclusive interviews with President Trump. I was also granted an interview with President Obama, which was funny. During the campaign, they took the picture of me and President Obama at the White House and acted like we were prom dates. You know, it was kind of, you know how they'll do that with the media. But I interviewed President Trump twice. I was always fair. I felt it wasn't my job to tear him down. It was my job to treat him fairly. And I never did, by the way, that amnesty thing that you mentioned. That was me as a journalist saying, hey, what are your thoughts on amnesty?
Okay, I mean, Kari, all I'm saying is the perception of you was that you were very much part of the liberal establishment, and suddenly you are where you are. Trump then endorses you.
But he did see me at that turning point event. And at the time, I think there were 5 people running, maybe 7 people running. He listed off all of our names, who's running for governor. And when he said my name, the crowd went nuts. It was a beautiful, wonderful moment.
Yeah, and I was there.
I think it was like a minute long.
I was at Mar-a-Lago. I was at the back of the audience at Mar-a-Lago. I didn't see you that night, but I was at Mar-a-Lago when he endorsed you in front of that crowd at Mar-a-Lago. I was there that evening, and off you went and ran this campaign. And I was in Phoenix the day of the midterm elections. I was there, and this is a hard one. There is no doubt that in Maricopa County, the biggest, most populous county in Arizona, on the day, the voting system wasn't working.
Yeah.
People were told they had to wait up to 5 hours to vote. And I have to say, I mean, our system here isn't perfect. We've had early mail-out voting for the last 20 years, plenty of fraud cases, plenty going to prison. I'd much rather it was all paper and pencil on the day voting.
Yeah.
But to think that in America, this advanced country that leads the world in technology and all these things, that people could be told in Phoenix it might take 5 hours to vote. So I understand. I completely understand.
Yeah.
Your deep sense of anger and frustration. Republicans tend to vote on the day. You feel your vote was suppressed.
Oh, well, when the machines don't work and they're printing the wrong ballot.
But here's the problem, Kari. And I had this debate last week because Donald Trump was in Scotland last week. And I was with him. He was on good form, actually. He really was, considering all the legal cases mounting up against him. But here's the problem, Kari. If you go on fighting legal actions over what happened previously, for Trump to win, for you to win with whatever you're going to do next, whether it's running for Senate or whatever it is, people need a big, strong, positive message. And you can't get that by fighting previous wars.
Actually, I disagree with you on that, Nigel, because we can't ever solve our problems. And we've got great solutions, positive solutions to solving our problems. But if we have an election system that is so mixed up, where the people don't trust in it, someone's got to stand up and fight. And we're doing well. Our court case is going to start next week. The media won't report it. We're going back to court. Friday, we have a court date, and next week we have a 3-day trial. So we'll see what happens.
Do you really think you can win with that judiciary?
I don't know if we can with the judiciary. I know that we have an incredible case. I know that we have facts in our case. And the people of Arizona know what happened on Election Day. They know that it was sabotaged. And the question is, can we get judges who are fair?
No, some do.
See. But I have
Kari,
to fight
some
it.
do.
Others
say it's conspiracy theory. I mean, all I'm saying to you is, I've noticed, when I was with Trump last week, I noticed that he's beginning to understand. And look, let's be honest, the Hunter Biden laptop, the absolute refusal of mainstream media and social media to talk about the contents of that, the money coming from China and Russia and Ukraine and all the rest of it. Well, I get all of that.
And the constant harassment of Trump by the DOJ. It's all meant to hurt him.
By the DOJ, the Russia hoax, which I went through here in this country as well. Look, I am a friend of Donald Trump's. I very much want him to win. I think Western civilization is genuinely under threat. And I think this is the man that can stand up and fight. I reckon, Kari Lake, there's a fairly good chance he could pick you as his vice presidential running mate.
I don't know if that's true or not. I really don't. I don't think he's even looking at that right now. He's putting out an incredible agenda. I know you've been paying attention, but maybe the people haven't. An incredible agenda right now. This is so far ahead of when he would pick a running mate.
But if he offered
I don't even think he needs a running mate, to be honest.
No, of course he does, because something happened to the
president.
He's
that powerful.
That's nonsense. There has to be a vice president. You would accept if he offered it.
I will do anything I can to help President Trump win, and I want nothing in return for it. I ask for nothing. And what I ask for is that he gets in there and works hard, I know he will, and turns our country around, because I want a country for my children.
Well, I tell you what,
whatever he decides.
We need it too, because if you fall, we all fall. Kari Lake,
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nigel.
We've got time for a couple of Barrage the Farages. Sarah has a question for me.
Hi Nigel, my name's Sarah. I just want to know why those leaving the armed forces don't get priority on the housing waiting list.
Well, isn't it funny? I've just had Kari Lake in the studio. In America, they treat their military veterans incredibly well. They even allow them to board aeroplanes before everybody else. We treat those that have served this country very, very badly indeed. It's shameful, and it's a culture, Sarah, that needs to change. And Rosie from High Wycombe has a question for me.
Hello Nigel, my name is Rosie. I would like to ask a question about the state of our roads. At the moment, our cars have to be fit for the roads with MOTs, etc., but the roads are not fit for our cars, with many garages saying that they have had hundreds of pounds of repairs to deal with. And I would like to know what can be done to rectify this. Thank you.
Well, Rosie, I read in the papers the other day that the pothole crisis is worse in the north than the south. I don't believe it, at least not the part of the south that I live in. I've been through several tyres. In fact, my 17-year-old daughter, who's just passed her test, within a couple of weeks, a tyre was shredded on a pothole. Rosie, honestly, so much of all of these problems, whether it's housing, health or roads, so much of it is due to the population crisis. 8 million more people in this country than were here in 2001. We're hearing net migration could be getting up towards 750,000. But no one in Westminster cares. It's all too difficult. We mustn't discuss these things. And our quality of life is being diminished. Jacob Rees-Mogg joins me, hot foot, from the House of Commons.
From the House of Commons, where they're debating energy and putting up prices even more for consumers.
What through subsidy?
Through levy on hydrogen, and through product standards that are going to be ever more expensive, and through further ratings for buildings. It's all about piling costs on people. And the time limit for speaking became very short, so I decided not to speak, because you can't get the argument across in such a short time. But it seems to me to be very unhelpful for hard-pressed consumers.
Yeah, to hell with the poor. It does feel that
way. And it's all this aim for net zero by 2050 without working out how you afford it first. And we need to get the affordability right before we set the targets.
And you'll be discussing the constitutional position of the King and politics.
That's absolutely right. There's an interesting story about Boris Johnson and the King as Prince of Wales having quite a fierce discussion about Rwanda. And we've got to maintain the constitutional niceties. They're very important.
Absolutely, Jacob. It's going to be great. Before all of that, let's get the weather. Please, can the rain stop? Please.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here with your latest GB News forecast from the Met Office. Today's lively downpours will ease overnight with some clear spells, especially towards the east, but further showers expected into Wednesday, Thursday, and for some on Friday as well. Low pressure in charge at the moment. That's what's bringing the mixture of sunny spells and showers. But there have been some very lively downpours, and they'll continue to affect the southeast during Tuesday evening, eventually disappearing into the continent. Meanwhile, the next system pushes further cloud and showery rain into the west, but in the east, at least, an interlude with clear spells for a time, mid to high single figures by dawn, and a few mist patches as well, but otherwise plenty of sunshine for eastern Scotland, away from the coast where it will be a fairly murky affair during the morning, and into eastern England, sunny skies for the first few hours at least. But the cloud and the showers in the west do migrate eastwards, and they'll bubble up widely with, again, some slow-moving, lively downpours and some thunderstorms. Temperatures up to the mid to high teens generally, perhaps a degree or so cooler compared with Tuesday, but not much in it. And where we do get some sunny spells, it will feel warm, high UV at this time of year when the sun does come out. But into the evening, well, that's when we see the cloud really break up as drier and clearer air arrives for a time. One exception towards the west, where it will continue to be fairly cloudy with some further showers, and the northeast of Scotland continuing to see the low cloud and the mist, especially near the beaches. Then Thursday morning starts off with spells of cloud and showers working their way from the west, some more prolonged rain for a time for Northern Ireland, for example. And then by the afternoon, again, it's a mixture of sunny spells and hefty downpours with thunderstorms in 1 or 2 spots. Friday's showers mostly confined to the south.